Okay, next up we have all of these sort of making a mark tools, I'll call them. These are the bitmap tools, whether they are for painting or other ways of creating marks on here that are not objects, they're not live. We'll get to that section later. Alright, so first up is the most obvious. The paintbrush. It's how you make just regular drawing marks. If you have a tablet, then you can really do quite a lot of cool stuff with this. I don't have my tablet hooked up right now. One thing you can do up here is change the size of the brush, right? Make it larger, smaller. You can also change what's called the hardness. That's sort of how fuzzy it is on the outside, right? You can see this compared to this. This is super fuzzy. It's kind of like almost like an airbrush, whereas this has a much harsher line to it. For reasons you'll find out in a minute are important, it does not have an actual sharp line to it. You can see right here it's still a little bit fuzzy. It's not as perfect a line, but it can get pretty sharp. You can also change the opacity, right? So we can kind of make sort of like ghosted marks. Those work better when the hardness is down. Let's go with a different color too. There we go. Alright, so this definitely makes things look like they're airbrushed. And you can see each time I click, it gets a little bit darker. Or rather, it looks like there's a little bit more pigment. There we go. You can see I'm changing the brush size without clicking anywhere. Those are the two bracket buttons that are right next to the letter P. But these allow you to change the color without going back into the up here in the menu. So for those of you who like hotkeys, I would learn those. There we go. Just tinkering around with colors. You can see I've got a color panel right up here. You may or may not have this panel here. If you don't, go to Window, Color, and it'll bring it up. This just allows me to change colors kind of like as I'm working. It's a little bit quicker. The other way to change colors is to simply click here, right? And it's the same interface. Got the square here, got the hue here, so you choose that you want it to be green or blue or purple or red, and then I want this color green, and then you can kind of go from there. You'll see that there's a black and white run right here, so if you're like, oh my god, I'm sick and tired of this, I need to do like text or something that's in black and white, then you can simply click on that and you'll get right the sort of default, which is black or white. And like I said before, if I want this green color again, I can kind of go here to my color picker and click where it's just kind of green, and I have my green color back. There we go. Alright, so that's the brush tool in a nutshell. If we click and hold on it, we get the pencil tool. And the pencil tool, I mean, it's similar to a brush tool, but it's not exactly the same. It's got a harsher edge to it. It'll look especially different if you're using a tablet. You can see here there's a lot of the options for it are completely different than they were for the paintbrush. And even here, if I turn down the hardness all the way, I'm not even sure if that's affecting anything. We'll find out in a second. Yeah, that doesn't do anything because the pencil always has sharp edges. So that's kind of Photoshop giving you two very different tools to use that mostly function the same way. You can still turn down the opacity for the whole thing, right? You can get that, but you can't ever get the soft fuzzy edges, which actually you will find comes in handy sometimes, especially when we get to the eraser. The eraser, let me zoom out a little bit. We're skipping down a few because the eraser is the next one up that's kind of most relevant. The eraser is exactly what you would think it would be. It erases the stuff that you've drawn. It functions just like the brush, though. It is a brush, really. It says it right here, brush. And it's got a size to it, it's got a hardness to it, so I can turn that hardness all the way down. And you can see now it's more like airbrush erasing. You can turn the opacity down. So I'll turn the opacity down to 24, and then I can kind of build the brush way up. You can see I'm just sort of vaguely making it softer, right? You're not really putting a hole in it like I just did there. Eventually it would go down to nothing, but it would take you a lot longer. Now I said that the eraser here is just like a brush, and it is, unless you change it to be just like a pencil. And this is where having the pencil tool actually kind of comes in more handy. I'm going to shrink this, or not. There we go. Back down. And I'm going to go back to the image where I had actual, pictures of things. And we're going to zoom in on this. And if I try to erase this on brush mode, I get stuff like this happening. Oh, actually I should turn the opacity back up to 100. There we go. So I get close to the edge and I click erase. And even if I have the hardness turned all the way up, I'm on the wrong layer. That's why nothing's happening. There we go. You can see it kind of cuts in a bit. Like I can't exactly control where it's going. It's cutting into my, I keep calling it a bell. I know it's a doorknob. But if I put it into pencil mode, what that does is that gives me a completely sharp edge. You can actually see, right? If I zoom in a little bit further, you can see the actual pixels. So I know precisely what's going to get taken away. Now, if you're thinking that's a very inelegant brute force way of erasing stuff, you are correct. This is not the ideal way to be getting rid of stuff. But if you're at the very, very end of whatever project you're working on and you just need to get that last, little couple pixels, just like these two up here. See these? They're just kind of errant. There we go. You can do so cleanly. You can also, you can see I'm really close to this, and I want to make sure I don't take away any of this. Well, with the pencil shape for the eraser, I'll know exactly what I'm getting, as opposed to if I was on the brush where, come on, there we go. You never quite know how far away from it it's going to be going. So that's the brush and eraser tools. Let me put these back. Go back to this section. All right. The next step is if you see this gradient right here, we're going to deal with the gradient later. If you click and hold on it, there's this paint bucket tool. Now the paint bucket is the sort of fill the space I'm looking at tool, right? So I've got this white space right here. If I click on it, it fills the whole thing in with blue. Now if I zoom in real close, I can kind of see that there's a bit of this white ghosting around. It does have to pick, right, what it considers to be this color to fill in, what it considers not to be. You can see that there's that tolerance again, just like with the other tool. So I can turn that up and have it take up, whoa, too much, more of the space. Let's see what happens at 40. There we go, went in a little bit further. The paint bucket is much better at handling clean fill-ins, right? Like if I go to this one and I zoom out, right, I've got these two images right here, and if I go to layer with Picard here and I paint around him, right, you got this nice clean edge. That's what the paint bucket's good for. If you've drawn very clean lines with a pencil and you need to fill them in, that's what I would use it for. I would not recommend using it for, filling in fuzzy airbrushed areas. It looks out of place. In fact, everything that I did with the harder lined brushes kind of looks out of place. It looks like Photoshop brushes. These things right here look like they could have been painted with spray cans or just about anything else. So you got to be careful of combining those two looks. Alright, next up. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to go back to my picture of this here. I'm zoomed in. I can't quite get the zoom in that I want. Right? If I do zooming out once, I'm at 100%. If I go in once, I'm at 200%. So I'm actually going to go down here to the bottom corner where it says 100 and just type in 150, and that'll put me exactly where I want to be. And I'm going to make sure I'm on the correct layer. And the two tools we have here, if the tooltips would come up, there we go. We've got a blur tool, which is exactly how it sounds. It's going to take whatever you're looking at and make it fuzzy. This can come in handy for if you've got a background and you want to have some certain things that don't stand out as much. You can always blur them like this. There are blur filters to go across a whole big picture, but you can use this to maybe blur just one particular item. Sharpen Tool, I'm not a fan. Technically speaking, it's supposed to make an image sharper. But once it's blurred, like once the information's gone, it's gone. You can't re-put into focus something that's blurry. It's certainly not going to take a photo where you were out of focus in the first place and make it sharp. That's not what it's going to do. It's just going to add a higher contrast. You can see here that those streaks going down, they're getting higher and higher contrast. That's more what it's going to do. The Smudge Tool is more like using a painter's knife on something, right? So there we go. It's like pulling putty around. I've got the strength turned up quite a lot. You don't have to have it turned up as much. I mean, there's definitely places to use this, but it's not. It's a very, very strong tool, even if you have it turned down to 22%. So use with caution. My favorite tools for a lot of stuff, burn and dodge. In a lot of ways, these are the make pretty tools, for lack of a better term. What does that mean? Well, I've got a brush here. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to look yet. I got to see. And here, I'm going to go along the bottom here. And you can see, way too strong. It's getting a little bit bad. But I can turn the exposure down a little bit. And I'm going to turn up the brush a little bit. And you can see it's kind of making these areas darker. But it's not, it's making it a little bit redder. It's making it a little bit richer, right? This is what the burn tool does. If you have it set to midtones, it changes the midtones. If you have it set to shadows, right, you can see it's making the shadows like really nice and awesome and dark looking. Look at that. If you have it set to highlights, which is probably what I should have it set to for this top piece, there you go. Now, how is this the make pretty feature? Well, it's taking the colors that are already there and kind of enriching them, right? It's not, I don't have to paint, and I'm adding sort of depth to this. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see that this is still kind of blah, and that it's almost got like more wood grain to it, because it's taking what's already there. And actually on this side I did it wrong. It actually looks like it's burnt. Like it actually looks like I took like a torch to the wood. The darker parts got much darker than the other parts. That's kind of how it works. I don't really think shadows is going to work. Yeah, now it really looks like I'm burning it. Undo a little bit. If I go back to highlights, all right, same thing. There's not much there to burn in. The dodge tool is the same idea, only it's making things lighter. So I'm going to turn the exposure down because these tools work way better when they're more subtle. And I can take it and make this kind of more shiny. I could take this shelf right here and kind of lighten it up. And it's the same idea where depending on what you have it set to, it's going to affect the highlights or the shadows more. Right, here we go. Now I'm really kind of washing it out. I don't want to do that, but I can actually probably, there we go. It's a little bit of a, it's still very dark. Like I said, you want small numbers. There we go. But again, it works with the image that's already there. And it lightens, in this case, it's lightening the highlights more than anything else. I can have it lighten the shadows. But it works with the pixels that are there. Alright, let's see. Burn and Dodger in here. Smudge, Blur, and Sharpener in here. You got the paint bucket. We got the eraser. The last thing I'd go over is the rubber stamp tool. The rubber stamp tool is kind of fun. It can be used in a really helpful manner, but the way I'm going to show it to you right now, it's just plain silly. Let's see. So I have a bunch of knobs right here, and let's say I want to, copy them down here. So I can use the the rubber stamp tool, and I'm going to turn the brush size like way up. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And the way this works is that I click Alt, and you can see the cursor changes, right? Like it took it a second actually, but the cursor changes. And I'm going to click here. And what that does is it tells it to start there. And you can see here how I move down here. What it's going to do is it's going to plant that, what you're seeing down here, based on what it's copying up there. So if I start clicking, right, it's making basically a whole copy of the whole image, right? There we go. But where you would use the rubber stamp tool, because that's just, I could just copy and paste it, is actually more here. It's often used for background extensions. For example, this picture has a lot of grain to it, so you can't just like pick a color and then paint it back there. If you try to do that, it's gonna look, let's see, turn opacity up to 100%, turn the hardness up to 100%, right? Like this does not look like this. It does not even look close to that because this has a grain to it. It's also very pixelated. It's an old picture, but there's variations here that are not here. So I'm going to change this to a pencil real quick and just kind of add back in. There we go. I'm going to use this as a base color. One cool trick you can do, if you hold down Shift, you'll draw in a perfectly straight line. Alright, and then I'm going to go back to the magic, I keep calling it the magic stamp, the rubber stamp tool, or they call it the clone stamp. I'm calling everything by its old name. And I'm going to hold down Alt over here. And you're going to see that as I paint, aha, see I went too far though. It's adding the purple that was there. But it's one way to get that sort of texture that is unique to this. Now if you go too far, you get a copy of Picard's head. Obviously we don't want that, as cool as he is. So you need to make sure that what you're copying is what you want to be copying, and you can follow the cursor. You can see the cursor right there. And you can see it's real easy to accidentally like copy this weird line that's right there. We don't want that. But now it's not perfect, it's not great even, but you can see that I've now started to extend the set with a texture that looks a lot like what was on here. People do this with trees and leaves and grass and clouds and skies and walls, all sorts of usually background stuff. It's often how you would paint out wires that are holding someone up, that kind of thing.